Most days, I'm too scared to pick up the phone if I don't know who the person is. For the most part, I don't even ring my doctor when there's something wrong with me because I'm scared that I'm wasting their time. So how in the world does Jamie Dornan have enough confidence to take on this role? One of the most beloved characters ever. There's no way that this goes well for him. One of the most talked about films over the past few years has been this proposed plan for a Lord of the Rings The Hunt for Gollum film to go ahead. Now, coming out of CinemaCon, we have more details on this film and potentially worrying details. But to start with, let's establish what The Hunt for Gollum is in the first place. In the appendices for the original Lord of the Rings book, J.R.R. Tolkien included a section detailing what Gandalf did to find Gollum before the events of Lord of the Rings in order to establish what he knew about the One Ring, as well as its holder, Frodo Baggins. This appendices went on to inspire a fan film that was released in 2009 to YouTube that is highly rated, is one of the most coveted fan films, and now has gone on to inspire this film that plans to be a full feature film on the same idea about Gandalf and Aragorn / Strider in the hunt for Gollum in an attempt to protect the One Ring and Frodo and Bilbo Baggins from Sauron and the Orc army. Now, before I get into my worries for this film, there is a lot actually writing for this film that I think could potentially be positive. The big thing to mention is that they have gotten pretty much everyone back for this film that worked on the Hobbit series as well as the Lord of the Rings series. And it has been talked about ad nauseum how much this cast and crew really cared for Lord of the Rings and how that love for the series has continued to today.
So it's filled with integrity, and it's also filled with, the crew is largely the same. Certainly the larger creative team is essentially the same creative brain trust as the original film. So it's same production designers. Yep. It is the same makeup and hair team. Obviously, Weta Effects are doing all of the physical effects. So it really is like a coming together of the original team. And then at Fran, Phil, Peter, they're all involved in the writing and producing. And so it's loaded with so many people who are a part of the making of the trilogy, devoted to making sure that they get the world right and the context right, and do right by these characters, and tell a really fun, compelling, great new story.
So, for example, playing the titular Gollum is the returning Andy Serkis, who also plans to direct the film. There is Ian McKellen returning as Gandalf. There is Elijah Wood returning as Frodo. There is Lee Pace returning as Thranduil. There is Peter Jackson returning to produce the film. There is the original screenwriters for the film, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens. And also they are adding Kate Winslet as Marigold, and they are adding the younger but highly coveted Leo Woodall as Halvard. This cast and crew is very talented. It has a lot of potential within that group to be successful. So whilst I do think that the cast and crew on paper for the most part is encouraging, what I would say is that there are a few glaring issues with that I would like to now talk through. First off, to start with the crew behind the scenes. The writing crew from The War of the Rohirrim have been brought on, as well as the original writers from both The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, these writers, I'm not directly blaming them for the failure of The War of the Rohirrim, but that film was not a box office success, and neither was it a critical success. Coupled with that is the fact that, in my opinion, Andy Serkis's career as a director has been underwhelming so far. In 2017, he made the film Breathe. In 2018, he made Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle. In 2021, it was Venom, Let There Be Carnage. And in 2025, he made Animal Farm. None of these films have been received generally positively. From what I have read, most critics seem to suggest that these films' failures are not as a result of Serkis's direction. However, what I would suggest is that it sort of symbolizes that he's not making great decisions in what he chooses. I also wonder about why is it Andy Serkis in the first place that is directing this film. I understand that in some sense there's probably no one better to direct a film that is presumably going to be motion capture heavy. He's clearly an actor who's well versed in that and has basically made his entire career out of being the go-to guy for motion pictures. But why couldn't you get Peter Jackson to direct this film? Why couldn't you go and get a Denis Villeneuve, who is very well versed in franchise work? Or what about Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, who are very well versed in films that require heavy special effects, as well as being well versed in studio films and franchise productions? This, to me, feels like a decision where they've gone, well, who else can we really get? I don't know, we don't want to spend the money to get Denis Villeneuve after he's finished the Dune trilogy, because presumably he'd be expensive. Alright, Greta Gerwig's tied up in Narnia. This kind of feels like a decision that it doesn't require that much legwork to go and get someone like Andy Serkis, because he's already connected to the project. He understands the character, he understands the franchise. Alright, we'll give it to him. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's the best director just because he's well versed in the project. In fact, I would probably actually want someone outside of this main core to direct the project, or at the very least have a hand in it, given the fact that everyone else is so deeply invested in this. If, in fact, those that are so emotionally connected to the project can't see the forest for the trees. And in this sense, I don't think that Andy Serkis is the correct decision. I think that they probably should have gone out and got someone that would have been more expensive, but would have probably provided you with better direction. You go out and get the Russo brothers for Marvel, not because the Russo brothers are the best directors, but because they're yes men. They're willing to play the studio system. They're willing to stay within this system that confines them and constricts them, because they just want to be the biggest at the box office. They want to have their name on the hottest properties. On top of that, my main concern for this film, out of anything, is that they have failed to get Viggo Mortensen back on board as Aragorn. Instead, they have recast Aragorn as Jamie Dornan.
I'm in danger!
Who you will most likely know from 50 Shades of Grey. He was also in The Siege of Giardotville. He was in the BBC programme The Fall, and I would say that his range is far more limited, in my opinion, than Viggo Mortensen, so it does give me a lot of pause with him as an actor. Is he able to portray Aragorn as a leader of men in the way that Viggo is?
A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand, men of the West!
Does he have the warmth and the soft-spoken nature that Viggo does?
My friends. You bow to no one.
Does he have the persuasion tactics that Viggo Mortensen does, where he's able to bring people onto his side?
What say you?
You waste your time, Aragorn. They had no honor in life, they have none now in death.
I am Isildur's heir. Fight for me, and I will hold your oaths fulfilled. What say you?
Does he have the look, even, of Viggo Mortensen? I wouldn't argue that Viggo Mortensen is meek by any suggestion, but he's also not towering, but he doesn't need to be that in order to get people on his side, in order to encourage people and to show people that he is the leader, that he is the way forward. I don't really believe that Jamie Dornan has that. However, the one caveat that I would add to this is that Jamie Dornan is going to be playing Strider more than Aragorn. Strider obviously is more mysterious, he's more in the shadows, he's more of a ranger than he is a king. He doesn't need to be warm, he doesn't need to be a leader of men necessarily, and given the fact that I think Jamie Dornan as an actor is quite mysterious, can be quite dark in a lot of his roles, I'm a bit more on board with his casting in that sense, not over Viggo Mortensen, but in the sense that I can understand why you would go for someone like Jamie Dornan. But the headline for this is that Viggo Mortensen not being on this is more discouraging than it is encouraging for his replacement to be Jamie Dornan. To go deeper into why Viggo Mortensen isn't on this, I'd like to bring up some quotes that one of the original screenwriters gave. In the interview, Philippa Boyens argues that whether or not Viggo would return was entirely up to him. She had spoken to him, Andy Serkis had spoken to him, Peter Jackson had spoken to him, they'd all spoken to each other, and honestly, I cannot imagine anyone else playing Aragorn, but it will be completely and entirely up to Viggo. Whether Viggo does it or not entirely depends on how good the script is, and he doesn't have a script yet. So to be fair to Viggo, let's see if we write a good enough role and that he can find enough in it to see that it's a performance he wants to take on. After that, it'll be between Viggo and Andy of how that is achieved. Viggo Mortensen is notoriously picky and almost a perfectionist with his taste. He doesn't just choose films because there is a paycheck there. He chooses films clearly because he believes in it. And since the success of The Lord of the Rings, he has gone out of his way almost to choose films that are under the radar, that aren't necessarily going to be box office successes. The idea that this film and this script doesn't have enough in it that Viggo Mortensen would come back on board is extremely concerning. When you think about the fact that, again, The War of the Rohirrim didn't succeed, when you consider the fact that one of the main issues with The Hobbit was that it was extremely drawn out to the point that the majority of those films would just be regarded as boring and cannon fodder, I would say. It's extremely worrying that we are now looking at this film and going, okay, so at the very least, it's not written very well. And yes, you've brought on the original writing team who wrote The Lord of the Rings, but also they wrote the Hobbit films. They're at least partly responsible for the failure of those films. And then you've brought in new writers from the most recently failed Lord of the Rings film. It doesn't spell disaster yet, but it is the makings of a disaster. And therefore, I'm worried about this film. I think it's great that Elijah Wood is coming out and going, oh, we're coming into this with care. We love it. I couldn't see anyone else playing this character but me. I couldn't see anyone else directing this but Andy. But the fact that arguably the best actor in the series and the one that I would argue is probably the most loved character are not returning suggests to me that something is wrong with this film. And it's extremely early, but that's not a good sign. And this film needs goodwill going into it because The Rings of Power doesn't have goodwill and is damaging to the Lord of the Rings brand. The Hobbit films were damaging. The War of the Rohirrim was damaging. So the fact that this film is already off to a bad start in this sense is concerning. But I will leave that there. If you like this video, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, all that jazz. Thank you for watching. Bye.